So I'm willing to bet that some of you are probably wondering what's up with the video title, given the fact that I've already reviewed this episode way back in August of 2016. Over the past several months, I've been looking back at the way I handled that review, and if I can be completely honest, I'm not fond of some of the things I had said. I've been wanting to take that review down for a while now, but I didn't want to be missing a review of an episode from the reboot, so I decided to just go ahead and redo the entire thing from the ground up. The way I said some things in that review has left me feeling rather guilty, and I've been wanting to put my conscience at ease for a long time now, seeing as I have a clearer mind compared to when I was initially reviewing it. Given that this is the only way I can really put this issue to rest once and for all, I hope you understand. Hopefully this review will be just as good, if not better, than the original video I used to have up. With that said, let's begin. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the plot of the Disney film Enchanted, but for those of you unaware, it tells a story about a princess who winds up getting transported to the real world where she has to adapt to her new surroundings in ways that she might not entirely understand. And Once Upon a Townsville makes it pretty obvious that they're spoofing the exact same concept in the Powerpuff reboot, but let me be the first to say right now that it does not end up working out. After months of evaluating all of the episodes of the reboot, and that even extends to the episodes I have yet to review, I can say without a doubt that this is the worst episode of the Powerpuff reboot I have ever seen. The episode starts out with a princess running through her magical fairy tale land while trying to escape from a dragon, similar to the way most princesses in fairy tales tend to do. It's your standard damsel in distress situation, except for one small detail, that being the fact that the prince never shows up to save her, which ultimately leads to the princess falling into a magical well that transports her to the city of Townsville. Meanwhile, the girls are seen flying through Townsville discussing the chemical properties of clouds, which are indeed made of water, by the way, Buttercup.
If clouds were made of water, they'd be falling out of the sky all the time.
What? But yeah, this princess just so happens to land right in Buttercup's arms thanks to the perfectly comedic timing, with the same dragon scene from earlier nosediving straight after them. How this dragon managed to fit through this well in order to get to the city is beyond me. There's also an attempt at a fight between the girls and the dragon, but I wouldn't really classify it as one since all it takes is Blossom to use her ice breath on the dragon to make it leave them alone. Well, that and Bubbles scolding it to add some insult to injury.
Bad dragon!
Oh, Bubbles. Stay pure. Okay, so next the girls decide to place her down on the bench nearby so they can get some answers from her and try to figure out where she came from. But then... this.
My prince?
Wow, that just happened. You know, that could have been completely left out of this episode and I don't think anyone would have complained. Thankfully, it's just a simple misunderstanding and the princess willingly introduces herself as Princess Bluebell.
Well, hello, magical dwarves.
We're not dwarves.
That's heightest. This is a fairy tale episode after all, and what would a fairy tale episode be without characters bursting out into song in random places at the drop of a hat, am I right? It's nothing special though, harmless at best. It doesn't really give us any information we couldn't have already figured out for ourselves, and based on the way Blossom and Buttercup react to her lines, they're playing this section off as a joke anyways.
Hey guys, we really should get going home now.
Why are we singing?
I don't know.
At least they're self-aware they're trying to parody Disney movies. To an extent. The girls find themselves magically warped back to their own bedroom with Princess Bluebell over here, and Buttercup begins to moan and groan about all of the things wrong with the situation, especially the singing. Remember that for later. It'll become important. As for the rest of this scene, it feels somewhat redundant because the song Blue Balls just sang already explained who she was. But regardless, she also fills in the girls with what her motives are, those being getting herself into danger and her being rescued by her prince. I won't lie, I still consider this line Bubbles has right here to be one of the best things I've seen in the show.
When he does, my life will begin.
Say what? Didn't your life begin when you were born?
This leads her to wind up at a volcano, which I want to compliment the artist for designing because I think this looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, this can't save the episode from the dope with a death wish who attempts to kill herself by jumping in the pit of lava, only to be saved by Buttercup for a second time because she and her sisters know fully well that her so-called prince would never show up to save her in the first place. Okay, so up until this point, the episode is doing pretty well for itself. I'm under the implication that the girls are going to teach Bluebell over here to think for herself and act as her own independent person instead of relying on others to set her destiny for her, but that never comes to fruition. After rescuing her, the girls explain to Bluebell that she doesn't need this lame prince to save her. She could be doing other useful things with her time, like running a company or fighting bad guys or pretty much anything other than being dainty for that prince that will never show up. This episode is leading us to believe that this is going to be the lesson. that this woman should choose her own destiny regardless of what others may make her believe. Blondie here even considers this to be the truth at this moment. She openly admits that the girls could be right, and then guess what happens? She just blows it off and goes back to being the same single-minded imbecile as before.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't wait on my prince. Maybe he's not really out there. But maybe he is!
Up until this line right here, everything was going great. They had a good setup with a character that was about to experience what was wrong with their point of view, and I thought it could have taught people of all ages a very valuable lesson. But the fact that she just blows this off, that she has the gall to ignore the girls for her own selfish desires because she truly thinks this prince is going to save her, is disgraceful. Let me ask you some questions, Blue Balls. How would this so-called prince know you fell through a well and warped to a magical land when nobody was there to see it happen in the first place? What would indicate that this magical wishing well had the ability to transport you to another world? He didn't show up to save you in your own land. How would he know you were transported to Townsville and falling to your death inside a volcano? What makes you think he has the ability to save you from falling into a volcano in the first place? You're delusional, Blue Balls. Delusional. I can believe that she might be expecting this to happen for some time, but there comes a point where common sense just has to kick in even for people like her. I guarantee that if the girls asked her one of the questions that I just did, she wouldn't have a proper answer. And yes, I'm aware I'm being a little strict on this situation right now, but believe me, I have every reason to be. This frustrates me. This really does. And I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. So Buttercup ultimately decides that she needs to use another method to convince Blue Balls that she's wrong. The power of music. Never mind the fact that earlier in the episode, Buttercup specifically states she doesn't enjoy the singing on multiple occasions, so this just makes her look like a total hypocrite.
Dude, enough! This is super weird. I don't want to sing.
Gee, Buttercup, as if I didn't already have enough negative feelings towards this incarnation of you. Well, let's see what this song holds for us, shall we? I mean, it can't be that bad, right?
You're a princess, that's clear enough. But a princess is better when she's tough. Explosion!
And yeah, it is as bad as I expected. And do they seriously call that beatboxing? And should I even ask why there are random stock images of old people in the background of this sequence? What does this have to do with anything? How is this entertaining exactly? There's a prominent disconnect here that prevents this sequence from making any sense whatsoever. And isn't it a little inconsistent that Blossom complains right before the rapping begins, joins in to add some lines in the middle of it, and then goes back to criticizing the concept after Buttercup finishes? Well, after this mind-numbingly bothersome rap sequence comes to an end, Blossom attempts to talk to Bluebell once more, only to find out that she's already
Halfway there! Halfway there! Halfway there!
Next, we get a montage of Blue Balls attempting to kill herself over and over again because she's still delirious about the fact that a prince is going to come and save her. Lest we forget that the girls already explained to her that this guy was never going to show up, so they have to constantly go out of their way to save this woman from certain death. Finally, after all this time, the princess confronts the girls at the top of the tower, explaining that she doesn't want to be saved by the girls or herself, but rather this imaginary male figure that, as has already been stated many times before at this point, does not have any intention of showing up. You know what does show up though? The same dragon from the beginning of the episode, and it manages to grab hold of the girls while leaving the princess in the dust because apparently that dragon no longer cares about her. This brings us to another major issue with this series as a whole that I kind of glossed over in reviews prior to this one, but that's the fact that the girls are constantly finding themselves in situations where they're the ones needing to be saved. And I mean, this happened in the original too, but it happens way more in the reboot to the point where it makes me question if they're even the heroes the theme song claims them to be.
Powerpuff Girls fighting crime to save the world before bedtime.
And don't get me wrong, I've had people bring up the argument that the girls were placed into situations like this before in the original show. The go-to example of this would be Something's Amiss, specifically when Sedusa traps the girls with some sort of hair gel that causes them to stick to the glass window without any way to escape. But this ploy serves as a way to highlight Miss Bellum's character. This entire fight sequence with Sedusa shows just how much of a badass Sarah Bellum can really be. She single-handedly beats the snot out of Sedusa because she stands up for both the girls and herself. The same thing almost happens here with Bluebell when she manages to kick the dragon's face in the next week, but it ultimately ends up falling on its face due to her bad attitude and reactions to the other characters on screen following the events of the fight. But before I get to that, I want to go back to this situation with the girls and the dragon. There's 3 of them and 1 of it. There's no way the dragon would be able to take the 3 of them in a fight, and escaping from this thing should be a piece of cake. The girls should not be this incompetent. If a regular everyday human can beat this dragon, then there's no reason why 3 superpowered girls cannot, especially when they already beat this thing earlier on in the episode. But if one were to use the same defense I just gave, that being the fact that this capture served to make Bluebell look stronger, then you'd be correct. To an extent. I say this because this ending conversation between the princess, the girls, and the prince, who finally shows up after all is said and done, has got to be the biggest misstep in explaining a moral in a cartoon that I have ever seen. Unlike Miss Bellum, who clearly deserves the attention and praise for saving the girls, Bluebell does not. So we find out that the prince never showed up because he was too busy playing video games, and Bluebell finally comes to her epiphany that she shouldn't need to rely on others to begin her own life. Which is exactly what the girls were trying to tell her in the first place. You know, as terrible as that rap may be, at least the girls were correct in using it to teach Bluebell here a valuable lesson. But the way she blows the girls off in this next clip just ticks me off. It's the primary reason why I consider Once Upon a Townsville to be a horrendous excuse of an episode that's trying to teach a good moral, because it does the exact opposite in so many ways, and I'm going to go through each and every single one of them. Number 1. Bluebell blatantly admits that the girls were right all along, yet she chooses to chastise them for it. The Powerpuff Girls, for the entirety of the episode, were encouraging Bluebell to do her own thing. They were telling her she shouldn't be relying on others for direction in her life, but rather that she should do what she wants to do. This princess comes to this realization on her own and tells off the prince, yet refuses to give the girls the acknowledgement they deserve for helping her reach this conclusion. Even if it was completed indirectly, she should at least have the decency to admit the girls were correct and apologize to them for not listening to them earlier. Number 2. Bluebell claims they didn't respect her. This is most likely the most aggravating point out of all of them that I'm going to bring up, and that's the fact that Bluebell has the gall to claim that the girls didn't respect who she was and what she was doing. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that the girls were polite in trying to show Bluebell's the error in her ways back on top of the volcano. Again, as uncomfortable as that rap sequence may have been, there is no denying that the intentions behind it were nothing but positive reinforcement to help Bluebell obtain that epiphany and get her life started on the right track. Not only that, but keep in mind that the girls had to go out of their way to save her life on several occasions. It is readily apparent that the girls are starting to get sick of saving her over and over again because she's just becoming a nuisance in their lives. But they have to save her because it's the right thing to do. It's their duty as heroes. She doesn't even show the least bit of respect towards them, and that to me sends a very distasteful message that leads into point number 3. Suicide is no laughing matter. Now look, plenty of shows have shown characters partaking in suicidal behaviors before, and I really don't want to sit here for hours explaining why I think it's great for this particular episode of a cartoon but not okay for this episode of a different cartoon. So let me explain why this explicit example bothers me so much. The princess's suicidal actions are being treated as a quirk. They're a minor side effect of her behavior, something that isn't shown to be that big of a deal when in reality these sorts of things are very, very serious. Bluebell should be fully aware that she would not be standing there had the girls not saved her, because she witnesses the prince showing up late firsthand. She now sees with her own 2 eyes that he wouldn't have been there to save her. She knows the girls were doing her a service, yet she shoves them to the side because they weren't respecting her decisions. No, this is not something that should be happening in a show like this. And here's the thing. The girls could have gone on after the princess left to explain that it doesn't matter what she thought because they were saving her life. They knew they were doing the right thing, and it didn't matter how much Bluebell fought them kicking and screaming because at the end of the day, she didn't wind up buried 6 feet underground. But no, that doesn't get brought up either because the girls end up feeling guilty for treating Bluebells poorly when they were in the right for the entire episode. This isn't an example of Bluebell begging to be put out of her misery. This is an instance of her actions having severe consequences, all because she's convinced herself to follow through with a false conviction. Addressing this was the way out. That was the ace in the hole. If it had taught us that you should prevent someone from bringing harm to themselves and or others, then I would be praising this episode right now for teaching people a very valuable lesson that I can wholeheartedly agree with. Number 4. According to someone who shall not be named, the moral of this episode was supposed to be that different girls can have different interests and still be friends. Okay, so I won't lie, that is a great message to be teaching kids. I absolutely agree that one's interests should not define the quality of a person and that people should respect each other regardless of what they're into. I mean, one of my favorite television shows of all time features 6 colorful magic horses that learn about friendship, for goodness sake. I respect everyone for having some particular interests because I have some pretty weird ones myself. It's why I don't allow those interests to affect my perception of said person in the first place. But nowhere in this episode does this message fit. Not one moment even relates to this idea, and in fact the ending goes directly against it. If all the girls are supposed to get along regardless of their interests, why does Bluebell blow them off for bigger and better things? If I'm supposed to take away from this that all of them can be friends, why does this episode end in conflict? She literally leaves the girls alone in the cave on such a sour note that it prevents the conveyance of a lighthearted moral from ever occurring. The prince is left dissatisfied, the girls are questioning if what they like is wrong, the princess wants absolutely nothing to do with any of them. It's the exact antithesis to what is being claimed to be the message here. Number 5. The misleading moral from the beginning. It's confusing to say the very least, because it leads down one direction and then completely turns the tables into this other random message that really doesn't fit the episode at all. Like I mentioned earlier, I was under the impression that this episode was going to teach people to follow their own destiny. People don't need to rely on others to choose their lifestyle for them because everyone has the right to do what they want to do. It almost feels as if this was what the episode was originally going for, but then decided to pull a bait and switch in the last 3 minutes because it didn't know what it was doing. Number 6. The characterization of the prince. The prince was not given a very good portrayal in this episode. I honestly think it would have been better off had he never shown up at all rather than being presented the way that he was, because it would have provided for fewer negative connotations. Whether or not he actually appeared, Bluebell could have drawn the same conclusion, which is why I think this was a little unnecessary. Number 7, and yeah, I'm still not done. When did anyone criticize Bluebell for frilly dresses? At no point in this episode do the girls criticize her for liking frilly dresses or disliking punching stuff. Every time the girls brought up something like this, they were simply making suggestions. They listed possibilities like fighting bad guys and running a company as a potential starting point. They never said she couldn't do something. The only viable criticism that the princess can make against the girls in this episode is the sole fact that Buttercup was being a hypocrite for criticizing Bluebell's singing and then proceeding to sing a rap herself. But even then, that doesn't really have anything to do with her argument about them questioning her interests in the sense that they never said she couldn't do it. Yeah, they asked her not to sing, but that's not being disrespectful, that's being polite. If anything, I say Blossom handled the situation rather well. Number 8. Why does Bubbles feel bad for liking fighting when no one gave her a hard time about it? Bluebell states that she doesn't like punching people, but at no point does she give Bubbles shit for liking those things. Under no circumstance should Bubbles truly feel bad about having different interests from Bluebell's, considering she never gets told anything negative about having said interests. The problem is introduced and resolved in 3 sentences.
Guys, is it okay if I like frilly dresses and punching baddies too? Of course it is. Great! That makes me so happy!
And as if those reasons weren't enough, it doesn't stop there, because this episode was nominated for an Emmy. Out of all the potential reboot episodes there were to choose from, it had to be this one. In the words of a kind-spirited imaginary friend, I'm sorry, but that is not okay. Never before have I seen an episode of a cartoon screw up something like this in so many ways at once. Don't get me wrong, the social commentary behind Manboy's character, the removal of Miss Bellum, and the transphobic portrayal of Donnie are all terrible, terrible things. But this just surpasses all of those for me. There are so many questions I have about this that I doubt will ever be answered. So at this point, all I can really say is, thank God that's over.